Hey there, today is 3-4, solving two-step and multi-step inequalities. Now just like 3-2 and 3-3, this is very similar to how we solve two-step and multi-step equations. So just like equations, when you have more than one operation, you have to have more than one step to solve. And once again, we're going to use inverse operations to undo the operations in the inequality one at a time. So here's our first example. Now, just like with the equations, we find our variable and we ask, what's happening to the variable? Okay, well, if you look here, the first thing that's happening is it's being times by 2, and the second thing that's happening is being added by 45. So then, just like with two-step equations, I'm going to undo those in the opposite order. So my first step is to subtract 45. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So then I get 2b greater than 16. So then I divide by 2, because that's the opposite of timesing by 2. And I get b greater than 8. So then, just like the others, I'm going to go to my number line, put 8 on there, put a couple numbers on either side of it, now it's just greater than, so I have an open circle, and it's greater than, so that means it goes to the right. Okay? Let's look at one that's a little bit tougher. Solve the inequality and graph the solutions. So here I have x. Now notice that x plus 5 is completely on top of this fraction bar, this division bar. So the first thing that happens to x is that it gets added by 5. After it's added by 5, it gets divided by -2. So in this one, I know that a lot of you probably thought the first step was -5, but the first step is actually times -2. Now hopefully there's a little alarm going off in your head right now telling you that you're multiplying by a negative number. And when I multiply by a negative number, just like we learned in the last section, I have to flip the sign. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then my second step, -5. So then I have -6 minus 5, which is -11. So my solution here, x less than -11. So I'm going to put -11 on my number line. Put the numbers on each side of it. This is less than, so I have an open circle, and it goes to the left. Okay? So those are two-step inequalities. Now, of course, we have story problems. And again, just like before, we have to write an equation to represent the story problem and then solve. So to rent a certain vehicle, Rent-A-Ride charges $55 per day. And you can go as many miles as you want. So if I rent a car from Rent-A-Ride for one day, I get charged $55. Okay? Now, if I get the same vehicle from We Got Wheels, it's $38 a day plus 20 cents for every mile that I drive. I'm going to call my miles X. For what number of miles is the cost at Rent-A-Ride? Remember, Rent-A-Ride was $55. Rent-A-Ride less than the cost at We Got Wheels. So here would be my inequality. 55, that's the Rent-A-Ride cost, less than 38 plus 0.2x, that's my We Got Wheels cost. And now all I have to do is solve this. So I'm going to subtract 38 from both sides. It's going to give me 17 less than 0.20x, and then I'm going to have to divide by 0.2. So we'll do that to both sides. And I believe that's going to come out to be 85, but let's check it. Yep, 85. So this says x greater than 85 miles. So if I'm going more than 85 miles on my trip, then I should rent from Rent-A-Ride. If I'm going less than that, I should rent from We Got Wheels. Let's look at another one. The average of Jim's 2 test scores must be at least 90 to make an A in the class. He got a 95 on his first test. What grades can Jim get on his second test to make it A in the class? Now this one's a little bit easier actually. The average of his 2 test scores, okay, so remember that to get an average, you add up the test scores and then divide by the number of tests. So he's taken 2. He wants to get a 90 in the class. He got a 95 on the first test. So we're at his 2 test scores, which we don't know what one of them is, so we'll call it X. Add his 2 test scores and divide by 2. And that has to be at least 90. Now that was one of your key phrases. Hopefully you remember that that means greater than or equal to 90. So here would be my expression, or my inequality I should say. So here x is being added by 95 and then divided by 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is multiply by 2 on both sides. It's going to cancel out over here. So we get 95 plus x greater than or equal to 180. And then I have to subtract 95. So that gives me x greater than or equal to, I want to say 85. Yep. So this says that Jim has to get at least an 85 on his second test if he wants to get an A in the class. Now let's move on now from 2-step to multi-step equations. Alright, so to solve even more complicated inequalities, you may first need to simplify the expressions on one or both sides by using the order of operations, combining like terms, or the distributive property. This is just like multi-step equations where we simplify before we solve. Okay, I know I preached that a lot back in chapter 2, where we look at each side individually, simplify as much as possible, then solve. So in this first example, I have 2 minus negative 10, which if you'll remember, that's the same as 2 plus 10. So that's just going to become 12. And then I can't do anything over here on the right side. So then this is just a one-step equation. After I've simplified it, I just have to, divide by negative 4. Now hopefully something's telling you you're dividing by a negative number, therefore you have to flip the sign. So I get negative 3. Now since my variable's on the right side, I'm going to rewrite it the other way so it's easier to read. So I have t greater than negative 3. And then I want to graph that, so I'm going to put negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, negative 4, negative 5. It's an open circle, and it's greater than, so it goes to the right. Okay? Let's look at one that's a little tougher. Here I have parentheses. Now hopefully you remember that whenever I see parentheses, that usually means I'm going to have to distribute. So negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Then negative 4 times negative x, remember to pay attention to the signs, is a positive 4x. Okay, I can't do anything to the right side, so now I have it reduced into a 2-step equation. So x is being times by 4. and then added by negative 8. So since it's negative 8, I have to add 8 to both sides. So then I get 4x less than or equal to 16. Divide by 4. X is less than or equal to 4. And once again, I'm going to draw my graph for that. Put 4 on my number line. It's less than or equal to, so I need a closed circle to the left. Okay? And then, if you'll remember, fractions. Now when we taught these in equations, I showed you 2 different ways to solve these, and those 2 different ways still apply. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you the one where we just get rid of the fractions. Remember, the other one is where you just leave the fractions in there. So you could do either one, but I'm going to get rid of them. So since 3 and 2 are my denominators, the common denominator there would be 6. So I'm going to multiply everything by 6 to get rid of the fractions. So over here, 6 times 2/3 is 4. 6 times a half is 3. And 6 times a third is 2. Okay, so now I've gotten rid of all the fractions. I just have a 2-step equation. So the first thing I do is subtract 3. I get 4f greater than negative 1. And I got to divide by 4. F is greater than negative 1/4. And then I go ahead and graph it. I didn't divide by a negative number or anything, so I don't have to change the sign. So negative 1/4. Let's go 0, 1/4. Should be negative 1/2. Negative 3/4. So this one's going to have an open circle to the right. Okay, so remember fractions, and if you don't remember those, look back in chapter 2 notes. We talked about 2 different methods there. Alright, and then looks like that's it for multi-step inequalities. So 2-step and multi-step in 3-4 today. Remember to let me know tomorrow if you have any questions about any of them, and I will see you then.